We'll be ranking the top 10 NCAA and USHL based prospects in the 2024 NHL Draft on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hattie Kalakash, joined by Sebastian High, and on today's show, we'll be breaking down the top 10 NCAA and USHL-based prospects for the 2024 NHL Draft. It's a great group of NCAA and USHL prospects this year, so it's going to be really, really interesting. I think there's a clear-cut top four, but what's really interesting to me is what's happening in kind of the bottom end of that rankings and the players that we have in that range. Before we get into any of that, though, today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next and what you think about our rankings. And also, if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Odyssey, or wherever you're listening to this, make sure to make us your first listen of the day and make sure to leave us a rate and review. If you like the podcast, please let us know through ratings and reviews. It helps the channel out a lot. So, Sebastian, let's get things started here. We've got 3 honorable mentions. Well, was it 4? I think it's 4 honorable mentions, right?
I got four.
For sure. Absolutely. So do I. So let's go through them pretty quickly. Who are your 4 honorable mentions here in this range?
For sure. So I've got 2 NTDP boys in here. So I've got EJ Emery and Kamil Bednarik. EJ Emery is a really, really solid defensive defenseman whose transition defending has stood out in my viewing so far. And while he plays a very simple, straightforward game, he plays it very effectively and intelligently. And I don't see him overcommitting on chasing hits very often. He really values positional awareness and protecting the slot, and that's a lot of what I look for in defensemen that are very much focused on the defensive side of the puck. Kamil Bednarik is a bit of an all-rounder offensively. He doesn't have a high-end NHL projection. This isn't a player that I think is going to push his way into a top 6 at the NHL level, but he's a decent enough playmaker. He plays well with players that are that exceed him in skill. He's able to adjust his game and adapt in order to help out the players around him quite well, which makes me more optimistic about the bottom 6 projection with him at the NHL level. A player who is a wild projection, on the other hand, is Matvei Gridin of the he's not Youngstown, is he? He's Muskegon
Lumberjacks, yes. Exactly.
Of course, Sasha Bover's teammate, and he's a very skilled Russian winger, and the defensive side of the game is not a strength with Gridin. Neither is the overall engagement or the consistency. But when he's on his game, he's very, very skilled. He's excellent control of the puck, really, really fluid puck handler. And even at higher speeds, when he's really, really going, when he's at high speeds, he can really layer all of his tools together and create some highlight reel plays. But consistency is still a big factor there. That is an issue in some of my viewings. And the last one is one that I don't think is on your list here, but who I've liked a lot in recent viewings, and that's Luke Osborne. He is one of the younger players in this draft class. He's a September 9th birthday, which makes him very young. And he plays for Youngstown. I was getting my USHL teams confused here. He's a 6-foot left shot defenseman from Youngstown who thinks the game at a very, very high level. He's really, really intelligent, extraordinarily composed under pressure, consistently makes the right decisions, is not at all selfish with the puck, but when he knows that he's the person that should have the puck on his stick, he keeps the puck on his stick. And the way that he thinks the game, I think, is something that could really create the foundation for an intriguing NHL talent at the end of the day. But he's still very raw, and he's still very much adding tools to his toolkit to really project as a more holistic and NHL player. But he's been one that I've quite enjoyed as a big long shot projection in my viewings, and he deserves a mention here as an HM.
For sure. I like Luke Osborne. I'm just not really sold on the tools. The tools are really, I mean, lacking in some elements.
Yeah.
He's a decent skater, but not overwhelming. He's not really physical, but also in terms of his playmaking, his shot, and his hands as well. Just overall, the tools are subpar, but I really, really like the brain. So I'm really torn on him so far, and that's why I don't have him ranked here. He's not even in my honorable mentions. But if you look at my honorable mentions, I've got a player. I don't know if you have on yours, but Max Plants for me out of the NTDP has been really, really impressive. I've liked the dynamism. I've liked the creativity with the puck, the awareness, the defensive game. He's a pretty interesting player. He's undersized, but I think he plays in a way that compensates for his lack of size pretty well. But still, there are some limitations to his game. That's why he's here. He's been splitting between center and wing for the NTDP on the kind of bottom six. But I think that he can kind of work his way up a lineup and do a pretty good job as a complementary player on a top six. So he's pretty interesting. And then we have Matvei Gridin, of course, you mentioned before. Gridin, I believe I have in my honorable mentions, or no, actually, sorry, he's 45th overall in my rankings out of Muskegon. 6'1", 185. He's a left winger, plays next to Sasha B, and I think that he brings the straightforward back and forth element that Boisvert kind of lacks in this game. But I also struggle to see him kind of mold or adapt his game to his teammates, right? So that's kind of one limitation that puts him in the HM's list rather than in the top 10, even though I've seen him in the first round on some rankings. And I get it. I just think that he's a bit too linear or simplistic as a player. A player I have in my honorable mentions who I'm certain you have ranked is Teddy Stiga. Stiga is really, really good. I think, you look for players with one specific element that stands out, and with Stiga, it's the playmaking ability. He's not the biggest at 5'10", 176, and he's mainly been playing between the second and third line on the NTDP. But the playmaking ability is ridiculous. His ability to find teammates in stride, to hit the smallest seams with passes. He reminds me a bit of Beckett Hendrickson from last year. And then the last player I have in my HMs, who I know you don't have ranked at all, is Will Skahan. I had to slip him in here because he's violent, he's physical, he's pretty mobile for size. He's obviously not the most skilled defenseman, and you don't really expect much out of a 6'4", 212-pound defensive defenseman out of the NTDP, but he does what he does really, really well, and I think that's worth mentioning. But let's get into the first two picks of our top 10. I have Cole Hudson here at 10th overall. Lane
So
Hudson,
do I.
good. So take it away on him. What do you think about him?
I mean, yeah, Lane Hudson's younger brother, who is by all accounts a very different person off the ice, being extraordinarily extroverted, where Lane is more of an introvert,
Mhm.
and on the ice also quite different. And I think that difference makes the NHL projection a little bit more complex with Cole
Yeah,
Hudson than it was with Lane, because he's been not as offensively dominant as he was showing flashes that he could be last season. He's been a
yeah,
bit more restrained this year. I've seen less of the desire to be chaotic on the ice, which Lane has always had in spades. And in doing so, I've kind of seen Cole Hudson really limiting himself in his biggest areas of strength, like his creativity and dynamism and passing ability and skating are all real strengths. And
yeah,
there were flashes last season at D-1 where he's like really, really using them often. But this season has been fewer and far between, and the defensive game is a real, real concern. Like especially the transition defending is also like it was an issue with Lane, but with with Cole, it's another level of an issue, and
yeah,
it's it'd be a massive swing on upside. Like I think, like if he falls into like that third round range, he's more than worthwhile for his swing because
yeah,
the skill is tantalizing when he's on his game, but that being on his game has been a lot less consistent this year than we'd hoped to see so far.
yeah.
And I think that's what kind of keeps him so low on our list. But if his back half of the season can blow us away a little bit more, the room for improvement in these rankings is massive for him, especially compared to the other players in this range.
Absolutely. And then at 9th overall, I have John Mustard. John Mustard plays for the Waterloo Blackhawks in the USHL. And I mean, he's 6', 185, but I think that he can develop a power game over time. He's pretty young for this draft class. He's in an August 2006 birthday. Um, this is a player who loves the inside, who loves to cut inside pressure, and plays really in your face hockey. He's got a great shot. He's got great hands. And overall, we're talking about a player who hasn't really hit I wouldn't call him a power forward yet, but Mustard can very well develop into a power forward. And in terms of like all-time names for hockey prospects, he's up there. Like he sounds like he's a gangster from the 20s, like just a real like John Mustard, So I love the player, I love the skill set, I love the name. And yeah, I have him 35th overall in my rankings, and he's 9th overall. That tells you how good of a group of USHL and NCAA prospects this is. Who's your ninth
Certainly.
pick before we go to break?
Also John Mustard, and honestly, I think you said everything I would have said, so we can just
Yeah.
leave it at that.
Fantastic. So that wraps things up for our first segment. We'll get through picks 8 through 5 in our rankings right after these messages from our sponsors over at Sleeper.
It's almost the halfway point of the HL season, but there's still time for you as a fan to get in on the action with Sleeper. Sleeper is our number one choice at the Locked On NHL network for your daily fantasy hockey needs. Because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. To win 100 times your bet on Sleeper, all you need to do is correctly predict the outcome of 8 specific player stats. And you can get creative with those, whether you want to bet on the stars of the league, like the Nathan McKinnons and Connor McDavids and NHL All-Star Game passing challenge beast Nikita Kucherovs of the league, or the young studs like the Connor Bedard's who's back from injury now. The choice is yours. So use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability.
Alrighty, let's move on to picks 8 through 5 in our rankings of the top 10 NCAA and USHL based prospects of the 2024 NHL Draft. So let's start at 8th overall, and for me, it's EJ Emery, a player you had in your honorable mentions. I'm a big fan of his game. I have him almost in the first round. I think he's one spot ahead of John Mustard at 34. And yeah, I mean, overall, you're talking about a player who, he's in my first round. That's my bad. He's 32nd overall in my rankings. So with Emery, I mean, you're talking about a player who's really, really good at the thing he does. He's a right-handed defenseman, pretty decently sized, and probably a top 2, top 3 rush defender in this draft. He might even be the best. Like, he's really, really good at it. I've also liked the in-zone defending a bit. I like the way that he clears the net front and does the little details that work really well in zone at the NHL level. And I've seen some concerns about the offensive production. I guess I'm a tiny bit more, on board with the possibility that EJ Emery scores like 30 points at the NHL level than you are. But I mean, I see some glimpses of like cross crease passes, really interesting kind of snap passes through the middle of the ice, right on a teammate's stick. And overall, I think he sees the play well. It's just his tools haven't developed yet, but I think he can definitely get there. And with the frame, with the base of, with a fallback game, like he can always fall back on his rush defending, even if the offense defaults, right? So I think an NHL role is more than realistic. And once he's there, he's going to start exploring and trying new things out. Kind of Jaden Struble like. I think that this could be a pretty interesting pick. So that's why I have him in the first round here. But who's your 8th overall ranked pick?
I've got Michael Hage, who I assume is coming up for you pretty shortly.
Oh, yeah.
I've quite liked his development over the course of this season. Like, he missed a lot of his D-1 season last year through injury, only played 13 games with the Chicago Steel in the USHL, but
Yeah.
he's a 6-foot right shot center, and I've really, really liked how he's developed because he started off being like a raw skill, raw chaos player, but he's really found a level of control in his game over the course of the past few months, and that's made him a lot more effective in all 3 zones. He's been playing a lot better with his teammates and using them as outlets when he's under pressure rather than going pond hockey mode and just losing the puck when he's just relying on his skill, which is quite impressive. He's quite a solid puck handler and decent playmaker, but they don't solve every single problem, even at the USHL level. But he's been learning the limitations of his game, and that's been very important for his development. So he's a player that I've been growing on a little bit over the past couple of months, and who's up here at 8th on my USA prospect list.
For sure. And then at 7th overall, after EJ Emery at 8, I have Sasha Boisvert at 7. So Michael Hage is coming. Don't worry. But Sasha Boisvert I have at 7, mainly because, I mean, this is a player, he plays with Matvei Gridin in Muskegon. He's the main kind of driver on that line. He's 6'2", 179, plays between center and wing. And overall, I mean, watching Boisvert this year, one thing's really clear. He has the brain and the hands in order to kind of be the primary focus of his line. I think the skating's an issue for sure. And I think the defense is there in flashes, but I think the effort and willingness to get involved defensively is still inconsistent. But in Boisvert, you're getting a player who can definitely move the puck with his brain and his hands, and kind of he can play the off puck game fairly well, which kind of works out well with his skating. That's why I have him one spot ahead of EJ Emery at 31st overall. There's not a big gap between the two. I just believe in Boisvert's skill set a lot more than EJ Emery's ability to get there, right? So Boisvert's upside is definitely higher than Emery's, and yeah, for a center who thinks the game well, I think it's a really decent bet here as the seventh best prospect out of the NCAA and USHL bunch. Who do you have at 7 though?
I got Teddy Stiga. This is higher than where you had him in your honorable mentions, but obviously you've watched more of the NTDP this year than I have, but the viewings I've caught, I've been really, really impressed with Stiga. This is a player who is not the biggest in the world, but is a really, really impressive playmaker, and the way that he's been able to elevate his line mates on a consistent basis has really been impressive. Like Cole Eiserman has been scoring so many of his goals based off of the hard work that Teddy Stiga is putting in transition, and even within the offensive zone, he consistently gets pucks from the boards to the middle of the ice, despite being a bit undersized. I'm a really big fan of the amount of like projectable tools that he's been kind of showing off, even in a form factor that is not exactly the most popular among NHL teams on draft day, and we'll likely see him drop relative to where his value might actually end up being. But he's been a very, very fun playmaker. Like I've loved his passing decisions. Like low down the offensive zone under pressure, he can consistently find an outlet if there's no high danger passing option. But if there is one, he's going to see it and he's going to attempt it. And the success rate's been pretty solid this year. And obviously, he doesn't complete all of them, but he really, really has a way of finding on his radar all the high danger passing options that are around him on the ice. And Cole Eisman's pretty good when he's found in open space with a cross crease pass. So it's been pretty lethal for the NTDP at times.
Absolutely. And then that brings us to 6th overall, and there goes Michael Hage, 6th overall
There
in my
we
rankings. And yeah, you said it pretty well. He was a pretty uncontrolled, kind of chaotic player last year, and he found that control this year and has been playing with a bit more translatability and willingness to kind of make the right play, not the flashy play. So I've been pretty interested and impressed with the kind of increased level of composure on the puck, the quick movement of the puck. He passes and goes a lot more this year rather than just kind of trying to blow through players. So yeah, overall I've been fairly impressed with him, and he shows up higher in my rankings than yours. I've been a pretty big fan of his play with Chicago this year. Who do you have at 6 though?
Sasha B. I mean, you already talked about him a decent amount, but I've been a really big fan of the brain, like a really, really intelligent offensive mind. And I've loved the flashes of paciness in his ability to pull off really impressive plays under pressure. And the combination of pace and composure is one that I always look for in players that are very intelligent, when you're able to process the game at a fast pace, but also react at that same pace.
Yeah.
It makes the a lot more interesting in the long run moving forward. But as you mentioned, the skating certainly a concern. Like, it's holding him back a little bit at this point, and it's not a massive red flag. And like, there's a reason that he's quite a standard player in first round rankings at this stage of the draft. But it's something to keep an eye on. But with the intelligence, he's able to get around the ice very efficiently, despite inefficient stride, and that has also made a big difference in my viewings.
For sure, absolutely. I like Boisvert. In terms of left shot centers, like the options were there this year, but not to the extent where like I'd be surprised if he survives the first round. He's a really good player. And then this brings us to number 5, and I think we might have the exact same player here at number 5. I have Trevor Conley.
Wow, you do. Shocking. Interesting. Cool.
Absolutely. Trevor Conley is the 15th ranked prospect in my rankings. And Conley, I mean, listen, you were talking about pond hockey earlier. I can't name you a prospect who exemplifies that more than Trevor Conley. But like
Andrew Crystal, I raise you.
That's true. That is true. I forgot about Crystal. But yeah, I mean, Conley is just, we're talking about a decently sized player at 6 foot, 6'1", but he's at 161 pounds right now. So he's got room to add some weight. He's a left shot, left winger, and he does everything with like a high end pace. And the stick handling, the brain, and the feet are at the same kind of level in terms of how they complement each other and how they work off each other. He's not too fast for his own brain. He's not too fast for his own hands, and he doesn't think too fast for his own feet. So it's just everything's on the same level there, and just the creativity and the willingness to just try everything on every shift is really, really impressive. Obviously, there's the off ice issues that for me, I mean, I keep myself a reservation regarding that. He could be higher on skill alone, but there are a lot of issues surrounding what's happened with him in the past that kind of keep him out of this range. But overall, if you look at the skill level, Conley's almost definitely a top 10 player in this draft, right?
For sure, but he's not the player that I have at 5th. I have Cole
Oh,
Eiserman, which is
okay.
interesting. So a slight variation for us in this top 5, but
Mhm.
it was a bit of a coin toss between the two. Like it's red flags on the ice with Eiserman, red flags off the ice with Connolly,
Yeah,
and I've seen a lot more projectability when it comes to Connolly and well-roundedness, which is not usually the tiebreaker when you're talking about players with pond hockey style. But
yeah,
Cole Eiserman is a one-trick pony, and he does that one trick extraordinarily well,
yeah,
which is shoot the puck. He does that better than any other prospect in this draft class, and it's not particularly close. Like Macklin
yeah.
Celebrini is definitely second in that running, but Eiserman's shot is lethal.
Mhm.
That said, this season, Cole Eiserman has had virtually no impact in any other situation on the
Yeah,
ice in my viewings. And I know that the metrics that are tracked by Mitch Brown from over at Elite Prospects certainly relate to that. The defensive workload is non existent with Eiserman when he's on the ice. He is not a forechecker. He does not create space for his line mates. He's not a particularly potent puck carrier or a transition piece. He gets settled in the offensive zone and, like Alexander Ovechkin, just rifles the puck. And I have my doubts about his ability to play Ovechkin style, even with as good as shot is. And that makes me a little bit concerned in terms of the projection and the likelihood of him hitting a really impressive ceiling.
yeah,
But we'll see how it continues this draft, because he is also one of the younger players in the class. He's an August birthday, and that certainly adds some development time that makes all of this a little bit more complicated.
yeah.
But so far, I've struggled a lot in my viewings with Eiserman, and I've started to drop him down my board a little bit because I've just not seen anything to merit a top 15 ranking this season. And I did
Yeah.
last year, but not this season so far. That's been very interesting.
For sure, and I'll get into that a bit more in our final segment here that's gonna be coming up right after these messages from our sponsors over at FanDuel.
Happy Super Bowl to you all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about getting the best seat on the couch, grabbing your absolute favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. I know I personally am also going to enjoy the advertisements because they're always just wacky, and gotta be curious what all these brands come up with for ways to sell their products. But beyond that, what I really enjoy is single game parlays, which FanDuel does incredibly well. And especially for a Super Bowl where my favorite team isn't playing, I can leave my anxiety at the door and just have a little bit of fun with a single game parlay, betting on the team I think is going to win and the players I think are going to perform. And you can do the same. So, new customers who join today, you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet or more wins. Just visit fanduel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's fanduel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
All right, so let's close things off here with our top four of the top NCAA and USHL prospects in the 2024 NHL Draft. I'll start off with my fourth pick. It's the guy you just finished talking about, Cole Eiserman. Mitch Brown in the Elite Prospects YouTube video of their draft rankings called him a 1 second player, and I think that's a really accurate description of him. 1 second before a pass, 1 second before getting the puck, and within that 1 second margin, he's probably one of the best players in this draft. His off puck movement's really solid, his shot setups are really solid, and his release is ridiculous. He's also a really good net driver. I think that he finds different ways to drive the net that are particularly interesting. And that's one thing that separates him, for example, from an Alexander Holtz or the kind of low calorie shooters that we've seen before, like an Artur Kaliev and those guys. That's an extra thing he can do. But there's a distinct and concrete lack of translatability in the rest of his game. The transition game isn't all there. The defensive game is almost non-existent. And yeah, I understand the concern because like I haven't ranked him 12th right now. I've seen him ranked in the top 3, top 5 very often this year. And I understand how risky this is for me. Like I can look ridiculous for this in a couple years. But I'm having trouble with every viewing of Eiserman. So yeah, that's why he's kept out of the top 3 for me and why he's 12th overall in my rankings. But let's move to your 4th overall pick, which I'm guessing is going to be Trevor Conley.
Indeed, it is, and
Yeah.
you gave a good breakdown of Connolly. Like he is exceptionally skilled. He's extraordinarily dynamic on the ice, as you said, pond hockey style to the max. And that's not the style that we really usually see dominate the USHL. It's more
Yeah.
of a CHL standard. But Connolly is pulling it off this season, and the ability that he has to really layer all of his skills together and combine them into one really cohesive on puck package is really, really impressive.
For
With the
sure.
puck on his stick, there are a few more dangerous players in this class than Connolly. He can really break a game open on a dime if he wants to, but the lulls and the valleys in his play are also a lot more substantial. Like this is
Yeah.
certainly a high risk, high reward type of player on the ice as well. And I think there's still some questions in terms of the maybe not consistency, but the overall like 3-zone impact
Yeah.
that has me questioning that like top 12 like draft ranking upside for him. But he's impressed me a slight bit more than Eiserman, but they're certainly a coin toss because they're
Yeah.
both super erratic, but also very, very skilled in very specific ways offensively,
For sure.
while also lacking defensive ability.
For sure. I would add though, for Conley, recent viewings have been really, really impressed with his off puck work rate and his defensive game.
Really?
So like that's come a decent way.
That is
Uh,
a shift and a half from what I
yeah,
last saw. Interesting.
absolutely. So I'm excited to get some more viewings in as the year and finishes off and see where he stands on that by the end of the year. But let's move to 3rd overall. I think we might have the same player here. I
Likely.
have Artyom Levshunov, 9th overall. And
Yeah,
I'm going to preface it by saying I know already a lot of people are raising their eyebrows. We have our reservations for Artyom Levshunov. Like there are
we
some
do.
pretty considerable limitations to his game, but in recent viewings, he went from a player who's outside of the top 10 to a player who's well within that second tier of prospects behind Macklin Celebrini. From 2 to 9, for me, it's wide open. You can put him in any order, and I'm pretty much comfortable with it. But for me, Levshunov, I've been a lot more impressed with the usage of his mobility. That was a big concern of mine. He's really mobile, but sometimes he uses it strangely. His decisions weren't always the best. There's been a lot more consistency with his decision making as of late, right?
For sure. Like I like the last viewing I caught got me to really raise him up in my rankings. And while he
Yeah,
hasn't quite cracked the tier behind Celebrini for me just yet, because that tier for me ranges from 2 to 7 rather than 2 to 9.
yeah,
He is sitting at 11th on my board, but he was at like 15th like a week ago. So my last 2 viewings were quite solid, and I was
yeah,
impressed. And I got to put him over Anton Salayev, and that's the first time this season that I've been on board with the Levshunov over Salayev take, which I think is going to be popular in our draft ranking meeting over at Dobber
oh
Prospects.
yeah,
But he's been very, very interesting. Like his metrics are exceptional, especially offensively and in transition. He's a very capable passer, very
mhm,
capable carrier.
yeah,
Like the puck handling skills lags a little bit behind the rest of the offensive toolkit, but the way that he uses his mobility allows the handling skill to shine because he gives
yeah,
himself space to handle, and he's able to access that space consistently. And
yeah,
I've been impressed with how he's been able to create space for himself, and also how aggressive he is at attacking space in the offensive zone. He's often a fourth forward in the offensive zone, which
yeah,
is a bit concerning to me. Like it's a bit like Denton Matejchuk vibes from his draft season in the
yeah,
offensive incursions. And it can be really high octane and high risk, high reward, like high risk, high reward play for sure.
yeah.
But that decision making has refined as the season has progressed. I remember it being a real sore spot back in October and November, and it's
Mhm.
not quite as poor at this point anymore, which is
For
certainly
sure.
promising.
For sure. I mean, we're talking about a big, 6'2", 200-pound right-handed defenseman from Belarus.
Yeah.
He's one of the older prospects in this draft. Is an October '05 birthday, but like if you're that big, you can move that well, and you've got the level of offensive skill that he has. Like there's room for you in the NHL for sure. But that brings us to 2nd overall. Do you have Zeev Buium? Because I have Zeev Buium.
I actually have Macklin Celebrini at second. No, of course, I have Zeev Buium at 2.
Yeah, I mean, he's about 6 foot, like 180, something like that. The rank, the height on Elite Prospects isn't up to date. I think he's listed as 5'11", 165. I don't think that's that accurate, but 6 foot 180 seems about right for him. extremely mobile, extremely creative, so slippery from the blue line. You can't catch him at the blue line. The lateral movement, I think with Bouillon, we're looking at a player whose skating isn't even as developed, right?
Yeah,
His edge work isn't perfect, his explosiveness isn't perfect. Like he's still working on that, and he's already this mobile, this elusive from the blue line. With the offensive skill he has, the playmaking, the shot, the hands, and the defensive game that was definitely there last year, and isn't as much this year, but I think that's just personal preference from Bouillon trying to focus on offense this year, right? Because like
for
at
sure.
the World Juniors, it was definitely there, the gap control. And last year with the NDDP, it was absolutely there. So like that's why I have him ranked fourth overall in my rankings, is because I know that the defensive game is there, and I'm not as concerned with the quote unquote lack of defense in this game. I think that's just a stylistic decision this year of trying to just rack up as many points as possible and explore and advance his offensive game as much as possible. Do you want to just
For
go
sure.
right ahead with first overall?
I don't think I have anything to add with Bouillon. Like he is your player. Like that was
Yeah.
all you. But Matt Gridin, I think, is a very easy choice at number one for us here. Like this is how long did we spend thinking about this? Like 0.1
None.
seconds, maybe?
None.
Yeah. Like
He's like there's such a
Celebrini,
gap between him and two.
exactly, right? And that's about our actual full-on rankings, not even just among USA-based prospects, right?
Yeah.
Like the gap there is huge. And Celebrini has really shown in every single viewing I've had the pleasure of catching in the last 2 years, and the progression has been really steady. He projects as a high-end two-way NHL center who can be a sniper on the power play, is one of the better transition drivers that we've seen come out of the draft in the last couple seasons. With a puck on his stick in transition, he can look like a power forward at times, and very, very focused on maintaining possession, but also creating chances, and very, very refined offensively. He's a really special talent, and he's also quite young for the draft. He's a June birthday. He's only turning 18 in June, and this is a player that I think every single NHL team would be absolutely ecstatic to add to their cupboard of prospects, and he would be a top 6 NHL center within a year or two of being drafted at least. And yeah, he's very, very good at hockey.
Absolutely is. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe and leave us a comment letting us know what you think about our rankings and what you want us to talk about next. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to leave us a rate and review, letting us know what you think about the podcast, and help us out the channel out a lot. And make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. Make sure to tune in for our next show as we'll break down the top Sweden and Finland based prospects in the 2024 draft. This has been Hattie Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.